The challenge. The sky above the alien city was not blue, but a strange burning red. The towers were sharp, like knives of stone, reaching high into the clouds. Every corner of the city was filled with strange lights and strange sounds. It was not Earth, not home, but a place where humans were only visitors. And now, one human stood at the center of it all. His name was not important, not yet. What mattered was the challenge before him. The arena stretched wide, built of black rock that looked older than time. Around it, thousands of alien eyes watched, glowing in the dim light. Their voices rose like thunder, a deep chant that shook the ground. They were waiting for blood, waiting for victory. At the highest seat sat the alien king, his crown made of living fire. Beside him, his advisors whispered. They looked down at the human with the same cold amusement a man might give a trapped animal. To them, this was already over. To them, the human was a joke. But the law was older than their laughter, older than their pride. It was the ancient law, a law carved into the bones of their people. A law that said, victory makes you king. And so, the human had been given a chance. Not armor, not sword, nothing of Earth's weapons. Only a wooden spear, light, rough, and fragile in his hands. The aliens laughed when they saw it, their voices echoing in cruel joy. But the human did not laugh. He only tightened his grip on the weapon. The challenge was simple in words, but deadly in truth. Defeat the alien champion, survive the fight, and by law, the crown would be his. The crown, the throne, the power. A king by victory, even if he was not of their kind. But if he failed, if he fell, his blood would water the arena floor, and his body would be left as a warning to all other humans. The champion entered, and the crowd screamed his name. He was no simple warrior. He was a giant, covered in armor made of dark steel. His steps were heavy, his eyes bright with cruel hunger. In one hand, he carried a blade as long as the human's body. In the other, a shield carved with marks of old victories. This was not his first fight. The scars across his armor told stories of battles won and enemies crushed. And now, he looked at the human like a hunter looks at prey. The human's heart raced. He could hear it beating in his chest. He could feel sweat gather on his palms. He wanted to run. His body screamed for it. But there was nowhere to run. Behind him was nothing but stone walls and alien guards. Before him stood the champion, a storm in steel. And all around him, thousands of eyes waited to see if he would break. But he did not break. He remembered why he was here. He remembered the faces of his people, the way they had been pushed, mocked, and treated as weak. He remembered the promise he made, to show the galaxy that humans were not prey, to show them that Earth's spirit was stronger than any armor. He lifted the wooden spear. It shook slightly in his grip, but he did not let it fall. His voice was low, almost a whisper, but the words carried in his heart, I will not fall. The champion stepped forward, his armor clashing with each heavy move. The crowd cheered louder, the noise filling every corner of the arena. The alien king leaned back, smiling. He thought this would end quickly. He thought the human would be crushed like dust. Even some humans in the crowd looked away, unable to believe. But one by one, heads turned back, because the human was not kneeling. He was not trembling. He was standing tall, his eyes burning. A fire no armor could cover. A fire no sword could cut. The wooden spear looked small, almost foolish against the steel giant. But the human held it as if it were a blade of lightning. For him, this was not just a fight. This was a message to the aliens, to his people, and to the stars. Humans were here, and humans would rise. The arena grew quiet for a moment. The laughter slowed, the chants paused. The silence was heavy, sharp as a knife. The challenge had begun. One human, one spear, against the steel of a champion, against the weight of an empire, against the judgment of the galaxy itself. And the law waited to be answered. Victory makes you king. The arena of stone. The black stone of the arena burned hot under the alien sun. Each step the human took left dust rising around his feet. The circle of battle was wide, with no shadows, no places to hide. Only the center, open and cruel, where fighters were stripped down to their courage. Above, the crowd was restless, their voices rolling like waves. Some shouted for blood, some shouted for mercy, but most laughed, waiting for the quick fall of the strange human challenger. Their eyes shone in many colors, red, gold, silver, but all carried the same doubt. No one believed, not yet. The alien champion raised a steel blade and slammed it against his shield. The sound shook the stone and echoed in the hearts of the weak. It was a warning, a promise. The champion's voice thundered through his helmet. "You will kneel before me, human, or you will die forgotten." The crowd roared at his words. But the human did not kneel. He did not answer with words, only with silence. And silence in that place was louder than any scream. The human looked at the arena floor, black rock cracked by centuries of battles. Bones had been buried there. Blood had soaked into the stone. Every scar on the ground told a story. Every mark whispered of lives lost to the same law. But he also saw something else. He saw that the cracks formed lines, paths, patterns. To most, they were random, but to him, they were maps, openings, traps, escapes. The arena was not just stone, it was a weapon, and he would learn to use it. The champion charged first. Steel feet crushing stone, shield forward, sword raised high. The ground shook with each step. The air split with each swing. The crowd screamed as if the fight had already ended. But the human was not there when the blade came down. He had moved, light as wind, fast as water. The wooden spear scratched against the champion's armor. Not deep, not strong, but enough. Enough to draw a line of warning. Enough to remind the giant that his enemy was not standing still. The aliens laughed again, but it was thinner this time. Not deep, not sure. The king leaned forward in his burning crown. His smile was small, but his eyes narrowed. For the first time, he watched closely. The human breathed hard, but his mind was sharp. Every sound mattered. The scrape of metal, the slam of boots, the hiss of the champion's breath. Every detail was a clue. He could not fight strength with strength. He could not break armor with wood. But he could cut the giant down piece by piece. He could make the champion bleed, not in one moment, but in many. He could win not by power, but by patience. The fight became a storm. Steel against stone, wood against iron. The champion swung and missed, swung and struck. Each blow left the arena floor cracked and broken. But each miss gave the human another chance. A chance to move, a chance to strike. A chance to show the crowd that he was more than prey. Dust rose like smoke, filling the arena. Through it, the human shape flickered. Sometimes near, sometimes far. Sometimes to the left, sometimes to the right. The champion grew angry. He swung harder, faster, louder. But the more he raged, the more careless he became, and the more the human learned. At last, the spear struck not just armor but flesh. A line of red flowed down the giant's side. It was small, almost nothing, but in that arena, it was everything. The crowd gasped, a sound sharp and sudden, and for the first time, silence fell. The human had drawn first blood. The alien king's crown of fire burned brighter. The advisors whispered in fear. And across the galaxy, where the ancient law still lived, one truth had been spoken in blood. The fight was no longer just survival. It was history, and the stone of the arena would never forget. First blood. The line of red was thin, just a scratch on the champion's side. But to the crowd, it was lightning. The silence that followed was heavier than thunder. Every alien eye widened. Every voice was caught in the throat. A human had marked their champion, and that alone was enough to break the certainty of their laughter. The champion touched the wound with his armored hand. His fingers came away wet with blood. His rage exploded. His roar shook the air like a storm. He raised his sword high, a blade black as the void, and he struck with fury that made the stone crack beneath him. The human rolled aside, dust covering his face. The spear nearly slipped from his grip, But he held it tight, tighter than ever, because now the fight had changed. The first blood was not just a wound. It was a message. It told the giant, "You are not untouchable." It told the crowd, "The law is alive." And it told the human himself, "You can win." The alien king leaned forward. His crown of fire hissed and twisted as if alive. His smile was gone, his eyes sharp as knives. The advisors whispered louder now. Some nervous, some angry. They knew the law, and they feared its power. If the human could win, he would not only take the crown, he would take their world. The champion attacked again, faster, harder. Every strike was a storm, every swing a mountain falling. The shield slammed forward, the sword sliced air. The arena floor cracked with each hit. But the human kept moving, not stronger, not faster, but lighter. He slipped through the storm like a shadow. Each time the blade missed, the spear struck back. Small cuts, small marks, but always closer, always deeper. The crowd no longer laughed. They shouted now, voices split between anger and fear. Some demanded the human's death. Others whispered in awe. The chant of kill turned into something different, something uncertain. A new chant began, low at first, then louder. By law, by law, by law. The human's breath burned in his chest. His arms ached, his legs trembled, but his eyes were sharp. He saw the giant's anger. He saw how rage made the champion careless, how each wild swing left gaps in the armor. The spear was wood, but wood could still pierce flesh, and patience was sharper than steel. The champion swung again. The sword scraped the ground, sparks flying. The shield lifted too high, leaving his side open. The human moved without thought, only instinct. The spear struck deep this time. The giant staggered back, blood spilling across the stone. The arena gasped. The silence was broken by 1,000 voices. This was no accident, no trick. This was skill. This was survival turned into power. The champion roared again, but it was weaker. The sound carried more anger than strength. The human stepped back, his spear ready. And in that moment, the crowd saw it too. The fight was no longer certain. The champion was bleeding. The human was still standing. And the law waited, watching. Victory makes you king. The whispers grew. The king's eyes burned like the fire of his crown. He clenched his fists, his face unreadable. But inside, a storm was rising, because in all the centuries, in all the battles fought in that arena, never had a human drawn first blood, never had a wooden spear cut through their pride. And yet here it was, written on the stone in red, a story no one could erase. The human looked at the blood on his spear. It was not victory, not yet, but it was the beginning, and beginnings were stronger than endings. He raised the spear high, not to boast, not to mock, but to show the truth. He was not prey, not a joke, not forgotten. He was the challenger, and he had made the first cut, the trap. The champion's blood stained the black stone, bright against the darkness. The crowd roared louder than before, some in fury, some in awe. The arena had seen many battles, but never this, never a human forcing the giant back. The law whispered again through their voices. Victory makes you king. The champion's rage burned hotter than the sun above. He struck his shield with his sword, each clang echoing like thunder. Enough games, his voice thundered. He charged with the speed of a falling star. Stone cracked beneath his armored boots. Every swing of his sword promised death. Every thrust of his shield promised crushing bones. The human felt the storm of steel surround him. But he did not fight the storm with strength. He fought it with silence, with patience, with thought. He let the champion believe his anger was working. He let his steps falter just enough. His spear slip just enough. He let the crowd believe he was losing, that he was tired, that he was weak. Even the champion began to believe it. And belief was a weapon sharper than any blade. The human staggered back. The spear dropped low, almost falling from his hands. The crowd cheered in wild relief. The human was failing. The giant laughed, his voice like iron breaking. Pitiful, he spat. But the human's eyes remained steady, hidden beneath dust and sweat. Behind the stumble was a plan. Behind the weakness was a trap. The champion raised his blade high. He rushed forward, shield thrust like a wall of iron. The ground shook, the air cracked. The human dropped to one knee, just for a moment. The crowd screamed, sure the fight was over. The king himself leaned back, satisfied. But in that instant, in the shadow of death, the trap closed. The human shifted, faster than the giant expected. His knee rose, his body twisted. The wooden spear slid beneath the champion's shield, not against the armor, not against the steel, but through the gap the giant had left unguarded. The point struck flesh deep and true. The roar of victory in the crowd turned into a gasp of horror. The champion screamed. The sound was pain, not pride. Blood spilled faster now, staining the cracks of the stone. He stumbled, his shield dropping lower. For the first time, the mountain of steel looked uncertain. For the first time, he was afraid. The human pulled the spear free. His hands shook, but his eyes were fire. The trap had worked. He had turned weakness into strength. He had turned laughter into silence, and silence into fear. The alien king rose from his throne, the crown of fire twisting like a living snake. His advisors shouted in panic, but none dared speak too loudly. The law was older than them all, and the law did not care for excuses. The law cared only for victory. The crowd broke into chaos. Some shouted for the champion to finish it. Others shouted the words of the law. By blood, by law, by crown. The sound was not one voice, but 1,000 clashing storms. The arena itself seemed to shake beneath their cries. The human stood tall in the dust and blood. The wooden spear looked small, but in his hands it was thunder. He breathed heavy, his body screamed with pain, but his mind was sharper than ever. The trap had been only the beginning, and now the fight was no longer about survival. It was about destiny. The champion stared at him with hate burning in his eyes. He had been wounded not once, but twice, by a human with nothing but wood, by a creature they called weak. The insult cut deeper than the spear itself. He raised his blade again, but now his rage was poison, and the human was ready. The trap had been sprung, and the battle was far from over. The turning point. The champion's breath grew heavy inside his steel helmet. Each inhale was a hiss, each exhale a growl. His body was strong, his armor was thick, but now his blood stained the black stone of the arena, and every drop was proof that the impossible had happened. The crowd no longer laughed. Their voices were sharp, split into two storms. One storm cried for the giant to crush the human. The other whispered the ancient words, "Victory makes you king." The sound clashed like thunder meeting fire. But beneath it all, a new feeling spread. Fear. Fear that the law might choose the human. Fear that a wooden spear might break an empire. The human stood tall despite the dust and sweat. His chest rose and fell with each heavy breath. But his eyes burned brighter than before. For the first time, he was not only surviving, he was fighting. For the first time, the giant was not the hunter. The giant was the hunted. The champion raised his sword again, but his strikes were no longer clean. They were wild, heavy, desperate. Each swing cracked stone, but missed flesh. Each step left his body slower, weaker. The human saw it. He felt it, the shift of power, the turning of the tide. He circled the champion like a wolf around a wounded bear. Each time the sword missed, the spear answered. Small cuts on the arms, scratches on the legs. Every mark grew into pain. Every pain grew into fear. The giant was bleeding not from one wound, but from many, and the human's wooden spear, once mocked, now carved the story of his rise. The crowd could not look away. Their chants changed again. Some screamed the champion's name, but more and more shouted for the law. By law, by law, by law. The sound rolled across the arena like a rising tide, and even the king felt it. His burning crown flickered. For the first time, his face tightened in worry, because he knew what the people knew. The law was bigger than any king. The champion roared and charged. His sword came down like a falling star. The human ducked, the wind of the strike nearly crushing him. But the spear moved faster than thought. It struck beneath the giant's arm. Blood poured again, bright against black steel. The giant staggered, his knees shaking. The crowd screamed, half in horror, half in awe. The human did not stop. He pressed forward, his spirit stronger than pain. Every strike was sharp, every move precise. He no longer fought like prey. He no longer fought to survive. He fought to win. He fought to claim. He fought because the law demanded it. The arena floor was red now. Dust and blood mixed into dark mud. The human's arms shook, his legs ached. But the fire in his eyes refused to dim. The champion's armor clanged as he stumbled back. For the first time, he looked small. For the first time, he looked mortal. The whispers of the crowd grew louder. Victory makes you king. The words spread like fire, unstoppable. The king himself clenched his fists. The crown of flame twisted above his head. And though he said nothing, his silence was louder than any roar. The human lifted the wooden spear again. Its point dripped with blood. His voice was low, but it carried through the silence. I'm not prey. And in that moment, the turning point was clear. The champion was no longer feared. The human was the final blow. The champion's body shook under the weight of his own armor. Every breath rattled like broken chains. Blood slipped from his wounds, running across the black stone floor. He had entered the arena as a mountain, unshakable, unbreakable. But now the mountain was crumbling. The crowd watched with wide, shining eyes. Some shouted for him to rise again. Others whispered the words of the law. The arena was no longer a place of certainty. It was a storm of fear, hope, and disbelief. The human stood across from him. His body was battered, his arms heavy, but the spear was still in his hands. And in his eyes, the fire had only grown brighter. He had been the hunted, the mocked, the forgotten, but now he stood as something more, something no one could deny. The champion growled and forced himself upright. His sword shook in his hand. His shield was cracked, heavy as a tombstone. He staggered forward, roaring with all the fury left in his lungs. Die, human, he thundered, and the ground trembled with his charge. The human did not move back. He stepped forward, the spear lowered, sharp and steady. The crowd fell silent. The world itself seemed to hold its breath. Still mit Hut. The shield slammed down. The sword cut through dust. But the spear struck true. It slid past the cracks in the armor, past the steel, past the rage, past the pride, and found the heart beneath. The champion's roar turned into a gasp. His eyes widened in shock. His blade fell from his hands. His knees hit the stone with a sound that echoed like thunder. The arena shook. The crowd screamed, not with laughter, not with mockery, but with the raw sound of history breaking before their eyes. The human pulled the spear free. Blood flowed in a river across the black stone. The champion fell forward, his massive body striking the ground. The dust rose high, covering both fighter and floor. And when it cleared, only one figure was standing, the human, his chest rising and falling like drums of war. The wooden spear in his hands, dripping with victory. He looked down at the fallen giant, and then up at the endless rows of alien faces. Not a word left his lips, but the silence said everything. The law was not broken. The law was fulfilled. Victory makes you king. The crowd erupted. Some bowed, some screamed in disbelief, but none could deny it. The human had won. He had slain the champion with nothing but wood. He had turned weakness into strength. And in the eyes of the law that made him king, the alien king on his throne of fire did not move. His face was stone, his crown twisting like a snake of flame. He had believed the human would be crushed. He had believed the law was safe. But now the law had chosen, and even he could not fight it. The fire of his crown flickered, and for the first time, the king looked small. The human lifted the spear high, not as a weapon, but as a banner. The crowd's voices rose together, a chant that shook the stone, the sky, the stars. By law, By law, the arena was no longer a place of death. It was the cradle of a new beginning. The final blow had been struck, and the world itself had changed. King by right. The champion's body lay still upon the black stone. The dust of battle hung in the air, glowing under the red alien sun. The wooden spear, broken at the tip but soaked with victory, trembled in the human's hand. He was bruised, bleeding, and exhausted. Yet he stood, and standing was enough. The crowd's roar shook the arena like an earthquake. Some voices cried in anger, others in worship. But the loudest chant rose above them all. By law, by law, by law. The words carried through the air like the beat of war drums. They were not just shouts. They were chains binding every alien in that place. Chains of tradition older than kings, older than empires. The alien king sat frozen upon his throne of flame. His crown twisted and hissed like a serpent. He had laughed when the fight began. He had mocked the wooden spear. But the law did not laugh. The law did not mock. The law spoke only in blood. And the blood had chosen. The advisors at his side whispered. Some urged him to refuse, to call the fight unfair. Others begged him to honor the law before the people turned. The king's jaw clenched, his fists tight. But even he knew, a crown made of fire could not burn away the truth. The human had won, and by victory he was king. The crowd parted as the king rose from his seat. He descended the stone steps slowly. Every eye followed, every breath held. The fire crown blazed brighter as he approached, but its light no longer inspired fear. It looked smaller now, weaker, because everyone knew it would soon belong to another. The human stood tall, though his body screamed with pain. He watched as the king stopped before him. The crown of fire hovered in the air, alive and angry. For a moment, it seemed as if the king would refuse, as if he would strike the human down, law or not. But the whispers of the crowd rose like waves. By law, by law, by law. The words pressed upon him heavier than chains. And the king could not fight the weight of his own people. With a voice bitter as ash, he spoke. By ancient law, victory makes you king. And with trembling hands, he placed the crown of fire before the human's feet. The flames bent and curled. They did not burn him. Instead, they wrapped around his head, soft, heavy alive, a crown not of gold, but of fire, a crown that marked him not as prey, but as ruler. The arena erupted. Some bowed on their knees. Others screamed in fury, but none could deny it. The law had been fulfilled. The human was king. He looked at the stars above the arena. Endless, eternal, waiting. This was not just his victory. It was the victory of his people. It was proof that humans were more than the galaxy believed. Not with armor, not with sword, but with courage, with will, with fire in the spirit. He raised the wooden spear one last time. Though broken, it was his symbol, and the crowd fell silent to hear him speak. I am not prey. His voice rang clear. I am king by right. The words struck harder than steel. The law itself bowed to them. And in that moment, the galaxy changed.